drug lord killed his student, who was just like his son, quite brutally.
I'm sorry. It's Manny.
But they didn't stop there, and even kidnapped his girlfriend, forcing him to shake hands with devils in order to perpetuate worst revenge ever seen by any human on that eve. Welcome back to Paramount Recaps. I don't have many subscribers, but your single comment is a ray of hope to motivate me.
It just don't look good.
The movie opens with Frank, who opens up community gym boxing. We catch up with him one morning as he heads to a local convenience store run by his buddy Bernie Pope, right on the ground floor of the boxing center. While Frank's still got tons of energy, Bernie, on the other hand, deals with agoraphobia and barely ever leaves his home. Besides running the gym, Frank also trains young boxers. He's especially close to Manny Parks, his star trainee, who's gearing up for his big debut in the pro boxing scene. Manny's been pushing hard under Frank's mentorship. Frank, a war veteran, knows how to guide him both in and out of the ring. One night, Frank invites Manny over to watch a video of his upcoming opponent, so Manny can get a sense of what he's up against. Out of nowhere, Manny gives Frank a gift, a cell phone with a heartfelt video message. In it, Manny thanks Frank for being like a father figure to him, especially since Manny's dad had passed away. Just as things seem all warm and fuzzy, Manny gets a text and has to rush off to meet his boss, Adelo Herrera. Things take a nasty turn when Adelo accuses Manny of stealing his money. Despite Manny's attempts to explain, Adelo isn't buying it and orders his men to attack. Manny, being the skilled fighter he is, holds his own thanks to Frank's training, even taking down one of Adelo's guys. But tragically, Manny gets stabbed from behind, catching him off guard, and dies on the spot. The next day, a cop named Mallard shows up at Frank's door with the gut-wrenching news of Manny's death. Manny was on the verge of going pro, and now he's gone. Frank's heartbroken and attends Manny's funeral, offering his condolences to Manny's mom, Rosaria, and comforting his little sister, Julie. Rosaria asks Frank to help find Manny's killer, but Frank tells her to let the cops handle it.
You're gonna find the animals who killed my baby.
Later that night, Frank swings by Bernie's shop, and the two get into a heated argument. Bernie feels like Frank's meddling too much in his life, though Frank's only concerned for his health. Just then, a group of armed men storm the store, attempting a robbery. Frank jumps into action, takes them down, and gets Bernie to call the cops. Afterward, Frank talks to Mallark about Manny's case, but it's still open. Mallark mentions they found drugs on Manny, hinting at possible involvement in Frank's stunned and is now determined to keep drugs out of his gym. He warns his students about the consequences of getting mixed up in that lifestyle. Frank gets suspicious of Manny's friend, Tukan, and decides to follow him. He tracks Tukan to an apartment where he's supposed to pick up some drugs. Caught off guard, Tukan spills the beans. Manny had been dealing drugs for a few months to support his family, but he was planning to quit after his first pro fight. Frank's angry and disappointed, feeling like he failed to notice what was happening. He makes Tukan take him to the drug den where Adelo's crew operates. Frank confronts them and destroys the stash, putting a dent in their business. Adelo's father, Leandro Herrera, an influential Argentinian diplomat, gets wind of Frank's actions and orders Adelo to eliminate. Meanwhile, Frank's still mourning Manny. He watches the video Manny made for him, and it brings him to tears. He tries to drown his sorrows by heading to Bernie's shop for more beer, but it's closed. As Frank walks away, he's ambushed by Adelo's men. Drunk and sluggish, Frank struggles in the fight, but luckily, Bernie shows up, wielding a hockey stick, and together they fend off the attackers.
Okay, this is awful.
Afterward, Bernie opens up about his past as a hockey player. He had dreams of making it big in the National Hockey League, but was forced to quit after an injury. Now he's living with a terminal liver condition, with just months to live. Hearing Frank's plan for revenge, Bernie offers to help him. Frank agrees, and the two set out to take down Adelo. The next day, they get ready to track down Adelo, but Bernie's old car breaks down, so they end up taking the bus. When they finally get to Adelo's place, they find out the crew is already cleaned up, leaving no trace behind. Frank decides to reach out to a police officer named Carmen to get access to Manny's belongings, which the cops have as evidence. Carmen wasn't too keen on helping out at first, worried she might lose her job, but Frank managed to convince her to lend a hand. He sifted through Manny's phone contacts and came across a lead, a guy named Hammer, who was Manny's drug supplier. With this new info, Frank and Bernie set off to track him down. When they found Hammer, he wasn't exactly cooperative and refused to spill anything about Adel. Frustrated, Frank took things up a notch and tortured him, while Bernie tried his own method, flirting with Hammer's girlfriend, who seemed a little interested in it. Meanwhile, Adelo found out that Frank was still alive and decided to deal with Hammer himself, dismantling his operation to get answers on Frank's whereabouts. In the midst of all this, Frank went over to Manny's place to keep his word to Julia. He built a secret door in her room so she could have a hidden spot to hide in. Julia was super excited about her new secret hideout. Later, Frank bumped into Bernie, who had asked Tucson to fix his old beat-up car. Since it needed a lot of work, they let Tucson continue while they headed back home. Just as they were almost there, a massive explosion destroyed their house. Luckily, Frank and Bernie managed to survive. Malark warned them to back off from their fight with Adelo and his crew, saying they were way too dangerous to mess with. Hearing about the explosion, Rosaria kindly offered them a place to stay at her house, letting them crash in Manny's old room. The next day, Frank and Bernie made their way to Adelo's place in Malibu. Frank came up with a sneaky trick to get past the security guard, but once inside, Adelo spotted him, and they ended up in a fistfight. Frank eventually cornered Adelo, but just then, a security guard showed up and aimed a gun at Frank. Sensing Frank wasn't someone to mess with, the guard hesitated. Adelo seized the chance to hit back, knocking Frank down. Thankfully, Bernie swooped in just in time to save the day. Together, they pressed Adelo for the truth behind Manny's death. Though reluctant at first, Adelo finally admitted that his dad, Leandro, was the mastermind behind it all. After hearing this, Frank demanded Adelo arrange a meeting with his father. They were out for revenge, and they weren't stopping now. The next day, Frank and Bernie met Leandro at a restaurant, and shortly after, Leandro was arrested. Frank went back to Rosaria's place to tell her the news. Overcome with relief, Rosaria hugged him tightly. That night, Frank and Rosaria had a deep conversation, and their relationship grew even stronger. But their happiness didn't last long. Malark showed up with bad news. Leandro had diplomatic immunity, so he couldn't be arrested without solid proof. Realizing they needed hard evidence to put him behind bars, Frank and Bernie decided to follow him. They tailed him in a taxi to a meatpacking plant, which Leandro was using as a front for his drug smuggling operation. After telling the taxi driver to wait, Frank and Bernie snuck into the plant by posing as workers. Inside, they uncovered Leandro's scheme of hiding drugs in meat shipments to be distributed around the city. Just as Frank grabbed a package of the tainted meat as evidence, Leandro's men caught them. Frank and Bernie were tied up and thrown into a freezing storage room. Leandro swung by to gloat, bragging about his immunity and taunting Frank with the fact that he knew about his relationship with Rosaria, even hinting at some dark plans for him. Leandro's men left Frank and Bernie to freeze while they kidnapped Rosaria, but Julia managed to stay hidden behind her secret door. After breaking free and taking down Leandro's guards, Frank and Bernie raced to Rosaria's house. Julia filled them in on what had happened, and they quickly tracked down where Rosaria was being held. But they hit a snag when they realized they didn't have enough cash for a taxi, sparking an argument between Frank and Bernie. Thankfully, Tucson arrived just in time with Bernie's truck, which had just been repaired. As they headed off to rescue Rosaria, Adelo got word that Frank and Bernie had escaped and were closing in. He ordered his men to take them out with a helicopter. Bernie managed to dodge the attack by leading them through the wilderness, and Frank took down the helicopter with a grenade. They caught up with Adelo and subdued him, only to learn that Rosaria had been moved to Leandro's car. Frank called Leandro and forced him into a trade, Adelo for Rosaria. At the meeting spot, Leandro released Rosaria, and Frank let Adelo go. But as Rosaria ran toward Frank, she warned him about a hidden gunman. Bernie, quick on the draw, shot the gunman with an old pistol from the truck, which he thought didn't even work. Moments later, Leandro's men arrived, and Leandro himself challenged Frank to a fistfight, even bringing up Manny to provoke. At first, Leandro had the upper hand, but Frank's anger fueled him, and he knocked Leandro out cold. The police arrived just in time to arrest Adelo and his gang, but Leandro didn't make it.
He's dead.
In the end, Frank, Rosaria, and Bernie celebrated their victory. Bernie recovered from a liver transplant thanks to Leandro's donation, and even ended up with Hammer's girlfriend.